Well, good morning, brothers and sisters. Today we are in John's Gospel, chapter 4 in our Bible reading plan. This is another well-known chapter, at least in church circles. It's the story of the Samaritan woman at the well. And when I was reading the chapter this time, what God brought to my mind and my heart was the fact that Jesus was not a cultural warrior. You know, we hear that term a lot today, cultural warriors. Jesus was not one of those. Now, he did impact culture and change it by his example, by his teaching, about what he and his followers at times did, and then what Christians would do in the years afterward. He would confront culture at times. But he did it by how he lived and what he taught. He was not a cultural warrior, so to speak, out trying to get laws changed. He was changing lives. And in this story, Jesus and his disciples, if you've read the chapter, you know this, were passing through Samaria. He sits down to rest at Jacob's well while the disciples go into the nearby village to buy food. And a Samaritan woman who had been married several times comes to draw water. They have a conversation, etc. And then when his disciples return, they're surprised that he's talking to this Samaritan woman, but she becomes a believer, and the story goes on that a lot of the people in the village become believers as Jesus would spend 2 days there teaching and ministering among them. But I want you to notice verse 9, chapter 4, verse 9. Therefore the Samaritan woman said to Jesus, "How is it that you, being a Jew, ask me for a drink, since I am a Samaritan woman?" For the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. There was extreme prejudice back and forth between the Jews and the Samaritans, and there's a long history behind it. Basically, it is that the Samaritans were a mixed race of Jews from centuries before with Gentiles who had been relocated to that part of the Middle East by the Assyrians and others. And so they weren't full-blooded Jews. And so therefore the Jews in Judea, they didn't like them. And there was prejudice, racial prejudice. Well, in verse 27, notice this, when Jesus' disciples returned from buying food. In verse 27, at this point, his disciples came and they were amazed. Notice that. Not just surprised, they were amazed that he had been speaking with a woman. Yet no one said, "What do you see?" They were cowards and would not bring it up, but in their minds and in their hearts, they were shocked that Jesus was talking to this woman. So you have in this story so many things in the culture that were wrong. Jesus confronted them and changed them not by being a cultural warrior, but he still confronted them. There was this racial bigotry, racial prejudice between Jews and Samaritans. And you see it in this story. There was also issues with speaking to a woman because in Jewish culture at that time, a man rarely spoke to a woman who was not his wife in public, especially if she was not accompanied by either her husband or father. But here Jesus was having this long conversation with this woman who was by herself. All of that going against their culture. Their culture says you don't talk to women like that. And their culture said you don't, as a Jew, speak to a Samaritan. And Jesus is doing it. So he confronted two taboos in their culture, the racial prejudice and the gender prejudice, if you will. But he also confronted some religious prejudice and religious wrong thinking. Jesus was ceremoniously unclean in two ways by doing this. One, when he took that cup from the woman, because, see, the devout Jews believed in what they would call ritual purification, and you only drank from vessels that had been ritually purified and handled by ritually purified people. Even if the cup was purified, but you took it from someone who was not, then the cup became dirty, and thus you became dirty spiritually. This woman they would have viewed as spiritually unclean, and her cup as spiritually unclean. And so Jesus, by drinking from her cup, was doubly spiritually unclean in the eyes of people like the Pharisees and others. So Jesus was confronting that misunderstanding, that wrong in their culture. So he's confronting it by, 1, talking to a woman, 2, talking to a Samaritan, and 3, being religiously impure by drinking water from a cup given to him by this unclean woman. And then finally, the very fact that he is in Samaria confronted their cultural bias. Those devout Jews who looked down with prejudice on the Samaritans, geographically, you had Judea and Jerusalem in the south, Galilee in the north, Samaria in the middle. So to get from Judea to Galilee, you had to pass through Samaria. It's like you're in South Carolina and you want to go to Virginia. You have to pass through North Carolina, okay? That's the quickest route. But they didn't want to do that. They would not dare set foot on that side of the tracks where those Samaritans lived, so they would walk around. They would go east, and then go north, and then go west to make it to Samaria, to Galilee. Rather be like us going, well, you're not going to go east because you're in the Atlantic Ocean, but you might go west from South Carolina and make your way somehow over into Georgia and up through Tennessee and then come back over to Virginia to avoid going through North Carolina. It's the long way, the hard way, and takes longer, but that's what they did. The very fact that Jesus said that's dumb, and he just went the shortest route by going through Samaria and actually stayed for a few days in Samaria teaching the Samaritans. Here's my point. Jesus was confronting all kinds of things in their culture that were wrong. Religiously wrong, culturally wrong. But he didn't do it by being an angry cultural warrior. He did it by how he lived, by his example. Think about race relations in America. Think about religious liberty and people living in our city who are of different religions. Think about people who are the victims of sexual abuse and their abusers. Think about the us versus them, the divisiveness in our culture. The best thing you and I can do is confront all those things, not by being a cultural warrior, but by how we live and what we say. We can influence people. We don't have to go along to get along. We can be different. Jesus was. And he changed things. Not by being a warrior, not by being angry, just by living different, by being different. And you and I can make a difference the same way. Well, that's what God spoke into my heart as I read this chapter. You have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.